I've been an avid backpacker for nearly a decade, traversing some of the most remote wilderness areas across the Pacific Northwest. But what happened during a solo expedition in the Olympic National Forest last autumn has permanently altered my perception of the woods, and perhaps reality itself. The trip began like countless others. I'd meticulously planned a 4-day trek along a less-traveled route, one that promised spectacular alpine vistas and pristine isolation. Weather forecasts indicated clear skies, and I'd packed accordingly. A lightweight tent, high-calorie provisions, filtration system, and the usual navigational equipment. By mid-afternoon on the first day, I'd ascended nearly 4,000 feet through dense coniferous forest. The trail was well-maintained but narrow, flanked by towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks whose branches formed a natural canopy overhead. The forest floor was carpeted with vibrant emerald moss, punctuated occasionally by clusters of fungi sprouting from decaying logs. As daylight began to wane, I located a small clearing approximately 50 yards off the main trail, a perfect spot to establish camp. I pitched my tent, prepared a modest dinner over my portable stove, and secured my food cache in a tree, well away from my sleeping quarters. Standard precaution against wildlife, particularly black bears known to frequent the area. I remember checking my location one final time on my topographical map before retiring for the night. My position was unmistakable, roughly 7.6 miles from the trailhead, elevation 4,150 feet, with a small seasonal creek approximately half a mile east. I'd marked my progress throughout the day with my GPS device, which I powered down to conserve battery. Sleep came easily after the day's exertion. The nocturnal symphony of the forest, rustling leaves, distant owl calls, the occasional scurrying of small mammals served as a familiar lullaby. I awoke abruptly at 3:17 a.m. I remember the time distinctly because I immediately checked my watch, disoriented by what had pulled me from slumber. The forest had fallen eerily silent. Not the ambient quietude of night, but a profound, almost pressurized silence, as if the woodland itself was collectively holding its breath. Then I heard it, rhythmic footfalls circling my tent. Too deliberate for a deer, too light for a bear. The cadence suggested a biped. My initial thought was another hiker, unusual at this hour, but not impossible. I called out a tentative greeting. No response. The footsteps ceased immediately. Then, after approximately 30 seconds of suffocating silence, they resumed, more slowly, more deliberately. This time, I detected something else, a subtle scraping sound accompanying each step, like something being dragged across the forest floor. I reached for my flashlight and hunting knife, heart hammering against my ribcage. Rationality battled with primordial fear as I unzipped my tent fly with trembling fingers. The beam of my flashlight illuminated nothing but the surrounding underbrush, seemingly undisturbed. The footsteps had stopped again. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding foreign and diminished in the dense air. Again, silence. Then, from somewhere beyond the perimeter of my camp, a sound I still struggle to describe adequately. A vocalization, not quite human, not entirely animal, somewhere between a whistle and a hum, modulating in pitch like a question. I spent the remainder of the night in a state of hypervigilance, knife clutched to my chest, ears straining against the resumed silence. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I drifted into fitful sleep as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric. Morning arrived with disorienting normalcy. Birds resumed their chatter, and the forest appeared exactly as it had the previous evening, almost too normal, as if compensating for the night's aberration. I examined the ground surrounding my tent, finding no discernible footprints or disturbances in the soil. I decided to continue my journey, attributing the night's experience to an overactive imagination, or perhaps a territorial animal. I broke camp efficiently and rejoined the main trail by 8:30 a.m. That's when I noticed the first anomaly, a trail marker, a standard wooden post with directional arrows that I didn't recall passing the previous day. This wasn't particularly alarming. I might have simply overlooked it. What caught my attention was that the arrow indicating the direction I'd come from pointed toward a dense thicket that clearly contained no trail. I consulted my map, then my compass. According to both, I was precisely where I thought I should be. Yet something felt subtly incorrect about the geography. The mountain ridge visible through breaks in the canopy seemed slightly misaligned from what my topographical map indicated. I powered up my GPS device. The screen remained blank for several seconds longer than usual before displaying coordinates that corresponded with my map location. Reassured, I proceeded along the trail. By midday, the discrepancies had become impossible to ignore. Landmarks I'd meticulously noted on my map were either absent or appeared in unexpected locations. A distinctive rock formation that should have marked a sharp elevation change was nowhere to be found. Instead, I encountered a small meadow not indicated on any of my reference materials. More disturbing were the trail markers. I began counting them, each one perfectly maintained, freshly painted even. They appeared at regular intervals, approximately every quarter mile. But with each marker, the directional information became increasingly contradictory. One indicated that the summit lay westward when it should have been north. Another suggested a non-existent trail junction lay ahead. I stopped to eat and recalibrate. The logical explanation was that I had somehow veered onto an unmapped trail, though I couldn't reconcile when or how this might have occurred. I decided to backtrack to the last point where my location had aligned with my cartographic expectations. As I retraced my steps, I noticed something profoundly unsettling. The trail behind me no longer matched my morning's journey. Sections that had been steep ascents were now gentle declines. A stream crossing I distinctly remembered navigating was absent entirely. Checking my GPS again, I found the displayed coordinates now completely incompatible with my physical surroundings. According to the device, I was nearly a mile east of the trail, in a section marked as impenetrable thicket. Panic began to assert itself. I'd heard of experienced hikers becoming disoriented, their minds playing sophisticated tricks when confronted with wilderness stress. I forced myself to breathe methodically, to assess my situation objectively. The forest had changed subtly as well. The composition of trees seemed altered. More western red cedars than I recalled, fewer hemlocks. The underbrush appeared thicker, less traversed, and the quality of light filtering through the canopy had taken on a peculiar amber hue despite the afternoon hour. I made the decision to establish camp early and reassess in the morning. Finding a suitable clearing, I mechanically went through the motions of setting up my tent, though sleep seemed an unlikely prospect. As I secured my rainfly, I noticed a trail marker approximately 30 yards away, partially obscured by foliage. I hadn't seen it upon entering the clearing. Curious and increasingly unnerved, I approached it. This marker was different. Weathered, the wood cracked and grayed with age. The directional arrows had been hand-carved rather than painted, and the text was almost illegible from decades of exposure. What I could decipher sent ice through my veins. Return 1952. I stepped back, processing this cryptic message when I noticed something else. Carved into the opposite side of the marker post was a crude representation of a human figure, elongated and disproportionate, with peculiarly articulated limbs and an oversized head. Below it, more legible than the directional text, "It waits at night." The remaining daylight suddenly seemed precious and rapidly diminishing. I hastened back to my tent, secured everything with obsessive thoroughness, and positioned myself with a clear view of both tent entrances, flashlight and knife within immediate reach. As dusk descended, the forest underwent a transformation that transcended normal nocturnal transition. The amber quality of light intensified briefly before, surrendering to shadows that seemed to possess unusual density and mobility. The temperature dropped precipitously, far beyond seasonal expectation. My breath clouded before my face despite it being early autumn. Then came the silence. The same unnatural absence of sound I'd experienced the previous night, but more profound, more absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood rushing in my ears, the fabric of my clothing as I shifted position. The footsteps began at precisely 3:17 a.m., the same time as before. This couldn't be coincidence. They approached directly from the direction of the weathered trail marker, unhurried but purposeful. The dragging sound accompanied each step, more pronounced than before. I extinguished my flashlight, some instinct suggesting that darkness was preferable to witnessing whatever approached. The footsteps reached the perimeter of my clearing and began their circular pattern around my tent, methodical, patient. The whistling, humming vocalization came next, but this time it contained unmistakable linguistic structure. Not language I recognized, but definitively communication. Modulated, intentional. Then something brushed against my tent fabric. Not the incidental contact of passing wildlife, but deliberate. A prolonged stroke, as if something was evaluating the material, or perhaps what lay within. I remained paralyzed, scarcely breathing. A second touch followed, this time tracing the seam of the tent entrance, then pressure, as if something was testing the resistance of the zipper. In that moment, rationality abandoned me entirely. I vocalized the first thing that entered my mind, a fragment remembered from the trail marker. Not since 1952. The pressure on the tent entrance ceased immediately. The silence that followed was different, expectant, calculating. Then a response came. The same phrase repeated back to me in a voice that approximated human speech through what seemed like an anatomical structure never designed for such sounds. Not since 1952. The voice, if it can be called that, contained multiple tonal layers, as if several vocal mechanisms were attempting synchronization. The footsteps retreated precisely 3 paces from my tent, then stopped. What followed was a standoff that lasted until first light. I remained motionless within my tent. The entity remained stationed outside, occasionally shifting position but never approaching again. No further vocalizations occurred. As dawn broke, I heard its departure, the footsteps and dragging sound receding in the direction of the weathered marker until silence gave way to normal forest ambiance. I emerged from my tent to find the ground around it unmarked by any footprints or disturbances. The only evidence of the night's encounter was a series of vertical marks on my tent fabric, 3 parallel lines approximately 4 inches apart, too uniform to be caused by branches or animal claws. What I discovered next defies explanation. My GPS device, when powered on, displayed the correct date but showed the year as 1952. No amount of resetting or reconfiguration would correct this. More disturbingly, the topographical features displayed on the screen matched my surroundings perfectly, features absent from my physical map. I abandoned my planned route and began hiking with singular purpose, to exit the forest by the most direct route possible. Navigation proved surprisingly straightforward that day, as if whatever anomalous geography had ensnared me had dissolved. I encountered no further weathered markers, only the 2 perfect, freshly painted ones at regular intervals. Each now pointed unambiguously toward the trailhead. By late afternoon, I reached my vehicle without incident. Later investigation revealed something I still struggle to process. According to local historical records, in October 1952, an entire survey team, 5 experienced forestry professionals, disappeared in the precise area of my expedition. They were mapping new trails for recreational development. None were ever found despite extensive search efforts. The only evidence recovered was a single trail marker, discovered 6 months after their disappearance. According to the report, it contained a crude carving of an elongated figure and an indecipherable message. I've not returned to the Olympic wilderness, but sometimes, in dreams, I hear that multi-layered voice repeating words I never actually spoke aloud. Not since 1952.
And in these dreams, I understand with perfect clarity what follows this phrase, though upon waking, the knowledge dissolves like mountain mist under morning sun. What lingers is the certainty that something ancient and patient makes its home in those woods, something that has learned to mimic trail markers and human speech, something that knows precisely when and how to find those who wander too far from established paths. And it's waiting still. I went on a weekend camping trip with 3 of my closest friends last summer, Mitch, Paul, and Lucas. We were all in our late 20s, and between work and life, we hadn't had time to just disappear into the woods like we used to. So we picked a remote site deep in the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. No cell signal, no nearby campsites, just us and the trees. We set up camp in a little clearing near a creek. Everything felt right. The forest was calm, the air was crisp, and we were surrounded by towering pines. The first day was perfect. Hiking, fishing, beer, and campfire stories. It felt like stepping out of reality for a while. But that night, something changed. It was just after midnight. The fire was crackling low, and we were all half laughing, half drunk when we heard something from deeper in the woods. A sound that didn't fit. Tapping. 3 short, sharp knocks, like someone hitting a piece of wood against a tree trunk. We froze, instantly sober. Lucas muttered, "Probably a woodpecker or something." But it wasn't. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Silence. Then again, closer. Tap, tap, tap. Mitch stood up, shining his flashlight toward the trees. Nothing. "I'm gonna check it out," he said, grabbing the axe we'd used for firewood. We all protested, but he was already walking into the woods, light bobbing as he disappeared. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then, tap, 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 right behind us. We spun around, flashlights scanning the trees. No one. Then Mitch came stumbling back out of the woods, pale as a ghost, eyes wide. He dropped the axe and whispered, "We need to leave. Now." We tried to ask what happened, but he just kept shaking his head. "They're not people," he said. "They're watching." None of us knew what that meant, but it was enough to make us douse the fire and pile into the tent together. It was cramped, but none of us wanted to be alone. I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps outside the tent. Slow, cautious, something brushing the nylon. I held my breath, then I heard it. Tap, 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 right outside the tent wall. I shot up and whispered to the others. Nobody else was awake. I waited. No more sounds. Eventually morning came and we packed up in record time. Mitch refused to talk about what he saw. We thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I started finding things in my apartment. Small things, sticks arranged in patterns under my doormat, scratches on the inside of my windowsill. Once I found a perfectly cleaned bone, looked like a squirrel's femur, sitting on my pillow. I thought it was some sick prank. Then I got a voicemail. No number, just static. And then, buried under the hiss, the sound. Tap, tap, tap. I moved out of that apartment, changed my number, didn't talk to the guys for months, but the day I finally decided to call Mitch, his number rang, and then someone picked up. Not Mitch, no voice. Just breathing. And after a few seconds, tap, tap, tap. I hung up. That night I found 3 deep gouges on my front door, like something had scraped the wood with long nails or claws. I haven't gone camping since. And if you ever hear rhythmic tapping in the woods, don't check it out, because they're not trying to scare you, they're marking you. This happened 3 years ago when my girlfriend Claire and I went on a weekend camping trip to Olympic National Park in Washington. She had just finished a stressful semester in grad school, and I thought a nature escape would help us both unwind. We picked a lesser-known trail off the main loop, something remote, quiet, far from the typical tourist traffic. We hiked about 5 miles in, set up camp in a clearing near a ravine, surrounded by towering evergreens. It was beautiful.
and absolutely silent. Not the kind of peaceful silence you want, more like the forest was holding its breath. We pitched the tent, made dinner, and by dusk, we were sitting by a small fire watching the trees disappear into blackness. No signal, no nearby campsites. Just us and the wilderness. Around midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I got out of the tent, stepped a few feet away, and was midstream when I felt it. The feeling of being watched. You know how your body just knows? That primal alarm that crawls up your spine? I froze and slowly scanned the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing. But then I tilted the light up and saw something that still makes my stomach turn. A man, perched up in one of the trees, maybe 30 feet high, squatting on a branch like a gargoyle. He wasn't moving, just staring down at me. His skin was pale, dirty, stretched over sharp cheekbones. His eyes reflected white in the beam like an animal's. I stumbled backward and ran straight into the tent, waking Claire in a panic. She could tell by my face I wasn't messing around. I didn't want to scare her too much, so I just said I saw someone near the campsite and we needed to go. We packed up in under 10 minutes, fire still smoldering, tent barely folded, threw everything into our packs and started hiking back in the dark. Our headlamps barely pierced the thick trees. Every snapped twig behind us felt like a gunshot. After about 20 minutes, Claire stopped. "Do you hear that?" I listened. Far behind us, footsteps, crunching, slow, deliberate, matching our pace. We kept moving, faster. Every now and then, I'd shine the flashlight behind us, but the trail just vanished into darkness. Then we heard it again, above us, something rustling in the canopy, leaping between branches. We broke into a full sprint. We didn't stop until we hit the parking lot, lungs burning. We jumped into the car, peeled out, and didn't speak until we were halfway back to Seattle. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because a week later, I got an email. No subject line, no body text, just an attachment. It was a photo, blurry, low resolution, but clearly taken from up in a tree. And in the photo, Claire and I are sitting by our campfire, laughing, completely unaware. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible, is a face, wide eyes, dirty skin, grinning, watching. We went to the police. They tried tracing the email, but it was sent from a burner IP routed through 3 different countries. Nothing ever came of it, but every few months I get another picture. Different locations, always from above, always watching. We've moved twice, changed numbers, stopped posting anything online. It hasn't stopped, and every time I go outside and look up into the trees, I wonder, how many times have I not seen him? But he saw me.